those who don't know me, which I don't think is many of you, Trudy Bartlett from Regional Development Australia. The reason we're here today is around this tool called ID Profile. So we co-fund that. You guys pay for part of it. I'm pretty sure it comes out of the ECDEV budget, and we co-fund the rest of it so that it's available for all 10 of our councils across the RDA, Darling Downs Southwest footprint. Now, the reason we do that is we want to make sure that you guys have as much evidence and data available for you to make good council decisions, but also we want to make sure that the broader community and your ECDEV team and your grant writers have got data and what's needed so that they can actually put in the best possible grant application. Because the more grants we win in this region, the more economic stimulus the region gets, as well as the legacy of what's left behind. So we've had Kat on tour for the last 4 days, 8 councils in 4 days, 2,100 kilometres, and this is her second last presentation. So for Warwick, what we wanted to do, more for Southern Downs, what we wanted to do was have 2 sessions, one for council only, council staff and councillors, so that we can really run through how else you possibly could be using this team. We see some councils use it really well for their grants, but then we've got other councils who are using it for their social media, for their investment attraction, you know, which you guys do a lot of that. But we really wanted to take to councils and do some council-only tricks this time around to say, here's how else you need to be using this tool and get it to as much of you as possible. Hello, Kenisi. So as you would know, Vic was the RDA chair when we actually took on ID Profile. And so it was a big part of RDA to say, where we fit is giving you the tools to use to have better grant applications and make better decisions. So this was a key tool under Vic's tenure that we made sure that RDA had, and it's certainly one that we're continuing going with. I'm just going to let you know in advance that I'm going to hand over to Kat, who is an economist from ID Profile, who's going to navigate you through the tool so that you know how to use it. She's going to show you about 90% of what's publicly available. So what she's showing you is available also to your community groups, your chambers of commerce, your ratepayers, everybody. And then there's a couple of economic impact tools that you do need a password for. So in your team, definitely Julie has the password for it. Maybe a few others.
Yeah, the ECDEV team.
The ECDEV team. And that we're more than happy to give more of your staff access to that. So if you find that your comms team are going to end up using it a lot, or you've got a dedicated grant writer and that grant team is going to use it a lot, we will line up another Zoom training session for them so that they've got access to that tool as well. Okay, so the access to the tool isn't about, you know, only a group of people, certain group of people have got it. It's more around they just need some more training, and we're happy for more training and more people to have access to it. As far as your community groups go, chambers of commerce, that might be applying for grants. A lot of them know that they can either come direct to us or they go to Julie to get the economic impact reports that they need to put in a better grant application. Now, we have a no wrong door policy, so we don't care if they're going to Jules, we don't care if they're going to us, we just want them to get the information that's going to potentially give them the best possible chances of winning that grant. There's a lot of community that use it, and we probably don't get around to reporting back to you guys that, you know, we've assisted and that this tool gets used a lot thanks to us co-funding it. So I'm going to sneak out a little bit earlier because we have back-to-back meetings to try and fit in all of that crazy road trip with Kat before she's got to head back home. So the community session starts at 1:30 over in the town hall. So I'm going to scoot out of here a little bit earlier. So I'm apologising in advance, just so I'm over there, and I'll do the intro over there while Kat's still finishing with any questions that you might have. So make the most of her while you've got it. All right. Today is being recorded, and we will send you through the recording. So if you want other staff or other councillors to have access to it, that is entirely up to you guys to pass that on forward to other significant team members that you think this might be useful for. All right, Kat, I'm going to hand over to you.
Awesome. So as Trudy mentioned, RDA Darling Downs subscribes to 2 tools within our suite of data sets. One of them is the community profile and one of them is the economic profile. The community profile is all about your census information, and we display that from 1991 right through to 2016 as it currently stands. Now, that data is there to be able to back up a lot of your applications. The new data, the 2021 census data, will be coming out in possibly between July and October is when all the data sets start to drop in. Okay, that's going to be a really critical time period for your council to be able to review how your community has changed during that 5-year period, particularly over the last year, given the circumstances of the health crisis, the migration story that's happening in Queensland, agriculture changes, all of those sorts of things. So the community profile is mainly based on your census information. There are a couple of other modules, but it's mainly census information. Now, what I tend to do is if I'm looking for a specific topic, you can come right down to the bottom of this page and you find almost a menu of items. So if you're looking at, you want to look at volunteering in your community, or you have people in your community that are looking for grants around skills and training, they can come down here and straight away look at occupations or things like qualifications at highest level of schooling for the Southern Downs Regional Council area. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to take you around a couple of these places just so you can get a feel for how the program works. Essentially, I don't have enough time to put everything through, but if we can start to get a feeling about some of the areas where we need to go, particularly when the census information is released, it's going to be really important to keep an eye on those changes. So the first thing I'm looking at, we can see Gundy because I've just been there, we can see our 5-year age group. So what I'm looking at here is what is your dominant age structure in your community. You can change this and look at any of these drop downs. So Southern Downs Regional Council, and you can also change your benchmark area. So if people are going for a grant application with the federal government, you will change your benchmark area to Australia. So you can show the unique features of this region compared to the Australian data sets. So I'll keep it on Queensland here. Our comparison year is 2011. I'm not going to delve into the data tables. What I will tell you is that you can export any of this information, so into Excel or Word. So if you want to pop it straight into a document to accompany your applications or your advocacy documents for the Mayor, CEO, that sort of thing, you can drop those straight into those documents. When we come down here, this is our age profile. So as you can see for Southern Downs, your most dominant age structure in your community is sort of your 50 to almost 70-year age group. Okay, so that's your dominant age structure. So that's when we're thinking about providing infrastructure or support for the community that we currently have. This is where your dominant features are. In here, this is our working population. Okay, so thinking about how we stimulate jobs in that category, what types of jobs, because this will help to stimulate these little people. Okay, when we move down, we not only want to have a look at what is our dominant age structure, we want to see how we're changing over time. Okay, because that's another cohort of people that we need to think about, and we can see here is where we're changing most predominantly as well. So that has implications for things like, and straight away I start to think about healthcare, provision of healthcare, telehealth, loneliness, thinking about communication in those age groups, what types and styles of housing are we providing in the community if that's where we're seeing our greatest amount of change. Okay, when we come down the bottom of the page, we can see this dominant and emerging groups analysis, and that there just provides you with the written information that you can use in any of your reporting. Okay, so it's quite thorough, and it just provides you, it just means you don't have to do it yourself. So here we're looking at our 5-year age groups. That's going to be a really important one to look at straight away after we finish the census. We've also got our who are we, so we can look at birthplace in the community. So if you're thinking about, overseas arrivals and where people are coming from and how that's changed in amongst that 5-year period, you can look at that. We've also got the individual incomes, our employment status, volunteering and domestic work in our community, and how we live. And this is another one that as a council is important to look at as well, because it talks to us about the structure of our household. So when we're thinking about what sort of developments we want in the community, this is the sort of information that will help us to make those decisions. So we can see here our main household type is couples without children, which matches in straight away with our age demographics that we were looking at previously, followed by lone person, then couples with children. So what that's essentially telling us is, yes, we need to build our 4-bedroom homes because that's going to help us to attract that population into our community because it's affordable. But we also need to be thinking about what is realistic in terms of the types and styles of accommodation that we could be providing as well. When we come down here, we see where is our greatest change. Okay, and in that 5-year period, our greatest change was in lone person households. And there's lots of things that come with lone person households and lots of thought processes around as I mentioned before, safety, telecommunications, ensuring that those people have access to community services, all of that sort of thing. So it's an important one to think about. I know Toowoomba Council has done a little bit of work around their lone person and who is their lone person and what does that mean for their community and what is the types of accommodation that they could supply in order for people to age in place. So people to be able to age in the community without having to move outside of the region. Once again, that dominant and emerging groups analysis. And when we come up here, guys, you can actually export the entire page into Word or PDF. So we have lots of community groups that will come to us and they'll actually just export a page and put it into their grant application. And that's, it's full of all the information that you need. My advice is to do it in Word and then you can take out the bits that you don't need. Now, there's a new piece of information that we've got in here that I think is really important for councils, and that's around your job seeker data. So if you know anything about unemployment data and the labour force survey, it jumps around a lot in smaller communities because it's survey based and so it's sample sized. Okay, so when you look at unemployment data, using that percentage sometimes isn't a great reflection of what's actually happening perhaps on the ground. So this data, which we've just been given access to from Department of Social Services, talks about over-the-counter payments given through job seeker and youth allowance. Okay, so the thing I really like about this is people lining up and accessing those payments. Now, some of those people may be working a small proportion of hours on job seeker. However, it does give us a really good indication of underemployment, things like that. Now, when we look here at Southern Downs, between March of 2020, which we would consider sort of business as usual before COVID, we had 1,836 people in Southern Downs accessing job seeker or youth allowance. Now we have 2,101. Okay, so during that period and up till now, we have an additional 265 people accessing job seeker or youth allowance. Now, as I say, the good thing about this data is it, yes, it's across the counter, but it's updated monthly. So it's very timely information. So it's information that you guys can look at on a month-by-month basis to see how you're tracking in terms of local employment in your community and trying to convert those people out of job seeker or youth allowance back into jobs. Now, when we look at this data and we look at that peak period, so we've got 265 there in June 2020. So we're comparing March 2020 to June 2020. We actually had an additional 874 people accessing that benefit during that period. Okay, so it just tells that story around the impact of COVID on jobs in your local community. So when people are going for grants at the moment, we're encouraging them to use part of this information around these are the people that were accessing job seeker during that peak period. And that can be, I guess, part of that risk of COVID coming back into the community as well. So we can see 874, and then when we change that to what we're looking at now, and we can see the Southern Downs, 172. So there's been a lot of work done in order to be able to get those people back into jobs in the community, or alternatively dropping out of the system, which is another thing that your training providers and things like that would have a better understanding of. So certainly that's a really good one to look at. We're up to July at the moment, so we release those figures as soon as they come to us. So we're at July 2021, so we'll have the August figures coming out next month. So that's a really, really good one to look at. Now, when we come down here, guys, you can actually download a full report of the area. So when we come in here, and often after the census, it'll be the first thing that councils will do. Their economic development teams will come in here and just download all of this information into a report, send it to themselves, and be able to go through all of the changes that have occurred in your local community as well. So it's a really good report, gives you all of your information around household size, internet connection, whole lot of stuff. Okay, there's another page that I do like that is worth you guys perhaps exporting and printing off for yourselves, is this Southern Downs Regional Council Population Highlights page. And what it does is it just gives me snippets of information about your community that can be used in media releases, communications, that sort of thing, the Did You Knows, Facebook pages, all of that. You can see here your median age is 45 compared to 39 for RDA DDSW, regional Queensland 39, 37, so much older median age in this community. Standard sort of amount of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander population compared to the other region, compared to the rest of Queensland. We've got our couples with children, a little bit less, older couples without children, a little bit higher. And so you can, so on and so forth, you can go through here and actually just look at how you guys differ from other communities in Queensland. University attendance is low, university quals is low. So a little bit higher than the Queensland average. And that little green arrow beside that means that that's how much it grew between the census period. Okay, so if it says, you know, if it's in yellow, it means it didn't really change. This is telling me that, you know, university qualifications grew by 1.1% between 2011 and 2016. So you'll be able to follow that when the new census information comes out as well. So it's a good little page. You can just export it into a PDF. So when someone rings and says, what's the median income of people in the Southern Downs Shire, you can quickly access that information as well. The next tool I'm going to show you is your economic profile. And this is the one at the moment that is getting the most interest, simply because people want to have a really good understanding of what's happening in their economy and the way that it's functioning at the moment. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you the pages that I think are really, really important for you guys to have a good understanding of. The difference between this tool and the red tool is this information is updated yearly, and it's based on a range of different data sources. So it's based on labour force survey, it's based on household expenditure survey, national accounts, state accounts. We've got export information included there, industry reports, things like that. So once again, you've got that menu of items that you have down the bottom that you can have a look at. So if you want to look at building approvals, unemployment, exporting, all of that sort of stuff, you can drill into as much information as you like. There's about over 1,100 data sets in this particular portal. So it's, you know, sometimes it can get a little bit hectic. So your team will either talk to Trudy or talk to myself about what is the best use of the data and what should we be looking for. So the first place we go is our gross product. So this data is out to 30 June 2020. Okay, so what happens is in November, December of each year, we get this data. We get the national and state accounts reconciled. We then put the data into the local government multipliers. And then what happens is we then release the data in about March. Okay, so at that point, I'll send an email to all of the councils and say, if you want to have an economic update, you can. And that economic update will include what has changed in your economy over the previous year. Okay, and it's about, it has that lag effect simply because of the national and state accounts. So we're out to June 2020 as we speak. And what we do is we come down here and we drill down into Southern Downs Regional Council area. Now, sometimes we have on our Zoom calls people from all over Queensland, and they try and do their drill down, but you guys are pretty lucky you've got this rich information for your local government area. So we can see that despite COVID, we actually had a little bit of growth in our region over that 19 to 20 period. And part of that has been driven by the acceleration in agriculture at the end of, in the end of last year sort of thing. So we can see here where you're tracking in comparison to Queensland. So there's lots of different ways of showcasing this data. Okay, so if you want to develop an advocacy report, you can look at some of this information and look at the different ways of being able to display it to get your message across. So we've just recently been in Balonne, as well as even Gundy, and you can see the trajectory away from Queensland. So straight away, you know, it's a way of being able to say, well, we're really not getting much of the you know, the growth that may be happening in Queensland at the moment, potentially driven by drought. So we can see here, and when you look at your region, okay, so this is interesting simply because every other region I've been to has had negative growth for 10 years. We can see you guys have actually had year-on-year positive growth since about 2000, and well, even further back, 2007. We've had a few years of negative growth in there, one there, few there, 2005, 6. So there's been positive growth in terms of your GRP over time. So that's a really good news story in terms of being able to communicate that to your residents and ratepayers and that sort of thing, that you've actually achieved relatively good growth over that time period. We can see how that shift really took place in 2006, and we've seen one slight decline there in 2016. So you can see you guys have actually performed quite well despite COVID. So the next thing we look at is that's gross product. That talks about how our industries are performing. What we also want to look at is our local employment. So up to June 2020, we just had a slight increase in jobs. Now, some of that would have been kept alive through JobKeeper payment during that period as well. Let's have a look compared to Queensland. So there was a fall in the rate, but we can see here get some negative jobs growth through 15 to 17, but we've had some strong growth over the following periods, 18, 19, 20. And we can actually break that down by industry, guys, so you can actually see which industries are fueling that increase. Okay, so I've looked at gross product, local employment. The next thing I like to look at is my building approvals. And I know you guys would follow this quite closely anyway, but it gives you a good indication of perhaps what might be happening moving forward in terms of your construction activity, which has a high multiplier, which means that that money goes through the economy really well. And it's one of the reasons why the stimulus package came out by the federal government, simply because construction has a higher stimulus factor. So we can see strong building approvals in 2020, 2021. Which is good. And you can see the values down below as well, which you can use in any of your media releases. So I'm going to come up here now. So I've gone gross product, local employment and building approvals. One thing we've added this year, and it's because people are looking for more timely information, and it still is out to June 2020, but it's just a way of being able to look at that COVID quarter and see what the impact was on the community. So yes, you guys have had strong growth, but that strong growth may have been driven by events that had happened prior to COVID, and COVID may still have had an effect on your region. So this is where it's going to tell us. And here we can see our quarterly change in that COVID quarter. We lost 46 million in this region. Okay, so it's being able to say to those grant and funding bodies that yes, you know, we've had some good performances, but at the end of the day, this is how this shocked our region, and we will continue to see that flow on for a period of time. So we're still up to June 2020, and we can see here the fall in terms of GRP was much stronger than Queensland. Okay, so what tended to happen with COVID was initially the regions were hit really, really hard. And then it turned around and it went to the cities, then became hit. The urban centres became hit, you know, have been hit really hard after that. So we can see the GRP fell compared to Queensland, much harder. So that's our gross regional product. Now that will be updated for September quarter shortly. Okay, so that's another one that council can keep an eye on. And I know Trudy sends out the information to say, look, that's been updated, but that's certainly one that is much more timely, similar to the job seeker information. Here we can see in terms of jobs what's happened. So we can see our fall in our local jobs was 815, and we saw that increase up around that amount in our job seeker information. So this just allows us to have a look at, and in terms of jobs, our fall wasn't as hard. So our GRP took a bigger hit than Queensland, but our jobs didn't take as big a hit as the rest of Queensland. And that's primarily due to the nature of the industries, but also those coastal areas and tourism areas were hit really hard in terms of employment. So we can see how that has been affected. But certainly this is a good one for, once again, those grants that have been coming out around COVID, businesses using this information to be able to showcase how their region has been hit and the money that has been taken out of the region because of COVID. So that's our quarterly economic indicators. So I've gone to economic indicators, quarterly economic indicators. The next thing I want to look at is the profitability of my businesses. So I come in here to my economic value and I go to value added. At the moment in the Southern Downs, construction is the most productive industry, generating 343 million. And when I come down here, I'm going to change my comparison year. So what happens is when we update that data in about March, so March of next year, I will then come out to councils or, do a Zoom session with councils around what has changed in your data over the previous year. So you guys will be very aware of projects that you might have implemented or things that have happened in various sectors around your community, and we can start to have a look at how that has changed. So we can see here manufacturing has improved, particularly fabricated metal and food product manufacturing during that period has increased. So you can actually drop down and see your subsectors, which I think is really important because it's easy to generalize and say, well, we've done quite well in manufacturing, but when you actually look at it, we've also had a few little losses along the way in machinery and equipment, non-metallic minerals, this sort of thing. So we can come down here. Here's our accommodation and food services. This would be very much related to that COVID quarter driving that. Same with our retail trade as well, particularly around the motor vehicles. As people weren't going anywhere. Healthcare and social assistance. It's had some improvement, particularly in residential care services, which is good. We can come down here and we get this in chart form as well. So we can see construction, healthcare and social assistance, which is promising simply because, that needs to continue to grow. If we're seeing an ageing population, we need to continually see those healthcare and social assistance categories growing as well. So we've got construction. Construction is number one, and construction moves. Yes, construction moves up and down. So it's always being mindful that that sector is dependent on a lot of different variables. At the moment, I think a lot of communities, construction has become almost the key driver. Where I'm from in Livingstonshire, up in Yeppoon, construction has overtaken ag and that sort of thing as well. So we can see construction, healthcare, and we can then come down here and actually have a really good look at what has changed. Okay, so we can see this growth in construction activity in our community, manufacturing, healthcare, but we've had this dip away in ag, which we're looking at the moment simply because we have had some really, we've had some good news in agriculture and some good changes as well. So once again, guys, you get this dominant and emerging group analysis, so you can use that in any of your advocacy documents or people writing grants and that sort of thing. And I know the girls here use it really well. So that's our value add. The other thing we can actually look at is our exports, and you can break them down into international versus domestic exports. So if you want to have a look at your total exports, so we can do total exports, or we can break that down into domestic versus international. So one of the things that a lot of councils did when COVID hit was contact us about their exposure to international trade and the problems that were going to be associated with supply chain and things like that. And certainly this was the place that we were looking, was how is this going to affect our international exports? How exposed are we? Because at the time, we were finding it very difficult to get things out. We were finding it difficult to get things in to support intermediate goods. So we can see here ag, forestry and fishing, and you can see the numbers here. So 23.6 million, manufacturing 147.3 million in international exports, and then how that's changed. Okay, and then you can compare it to your domestic exports. Okay, so manufacturing certainly exports more in terms of, so you've got your food product manufacturing is really quite high, and you can see you export much more domestically than you do internationally in terms of your manufacturing sector. So you can go through here and actually have a good look at your exposure, and also at industries that it's on domestic exports. I'm just going to put total exports. So we can see manufacturing and ag, the main industries, and we had a lot of growth in our manufacturing. We had a bit of a fall away in terms of our ag, accommodation and food services, no surprise. So we can do the same thing with our local employment. So I go on here and I look at employment, and I like to look at my full-time equivalents, so people working full-time. And I come down here and once again, same thing. And this is really interesting. So we've ERP drop in ag, but we've got more people working. So we've got people working during that period harder for less, okay, which is very much a drought phenomenon that we see across the board. Yeah, so that's very, we're seeing that.
Part of the issue is that with the COVID and the drop in export, the prices that the farm gave were much lower. In fact, quite a lot of the growers were borderline with their efficiencies.
Yes.
After COVID, basically. So, you know, they still needed people because if you're selling something that your cost production is $12,
yes,
and you get $8 at the market, if you don't send, you're going to lose $12. If you do send, you're going to lose $4. But you still need people to
yeah, 100%. And you can see that across the data in most agricultural regions, even in North Queensland. So yeah, it's really, really interesting. So we can see jobs growth in manufacturing, construction, just have a look at this. So 83, 105 in fabricated metal. Be interested to see what that is, what business that is. Then we come down here and once again, you can see those changes. So you see it in that chart form. So I like the chart form because when you accompany that to an application, you can certainly straight away see the changes that have taken place in terms of employment in the region. And once again, that dominant and emerging group analysis. And guys, don't forget, you can export these pages into a PDF and attach them straight to your reports. So that's my local employment. The next one I'm going to take you to is this industry sector analysis, and then I'll run you through the economic impact model. So this, I really like this simply because it just gives me a really quick overview of particular industries. And if council has a focus on whether it be food product manufacturing or agriculture or tourism or accommodation or whatever it might be, retail, you can come in here and actually just click on these subheadings or these headings or subheadings, and you can come in and get a really just a good snapshot of exactly what's happening in that sector at any one time. So when I worked at councils, we would have used this if an investor was calling up and saying, Kat, I need some more information on your food product manufacturing. And we would be able to produce these reports really quite quickly. And it also gives them an idea of things like, you know, where their economic output is. So are they, do they do mostly local sales? Are they exporting domestically, or are they exporting internationally? So you're able to quickly get some good relevant information that may be able to help them. It talks about, you know, your worker productivity, all of that sort of stuff. And then you can just export that straight out. The other thing you can do is provide this time series industry analysis, which shows you over time how your sectors are changing in accordance with a number of different variables. So when I look down here, this is my ag sector, and I can show over time what's changed in terms of employment, output, value add. So we can have a look at our output here. And when I come down, you can see how since sort of, and I was chatting to the guys in St George in 2012, they were drought declared, and you can see just the decline in ag over time, and you can almost overlay, you know, weather changes to be able to see how that's changed. But this is a really good one for, say, for example, the guys in Gundawindi were talking about using this sort of data to showcase, you know, just the impacts that have occurred in the agricultural sector. So just being able to really show, look, this is what has happened over time in our ag industry, and the burden that can be on people. So that's our industry focus. I'm going to come down now.
You talked about tourism.
Yep.
Early in the piece, it didn't focus much on it.
Yep. So
what's the change?
Yeah, so in terms of tourism, there's actually this tourism sector analysis. So the way tourism works is it's a combination of all of these industries. So when I look at my industry subheadings and all of that sort of thing, there's no tourism sector. It's made up of, I think, accommodation, retail, transport, I think even a little bit of education now, this sort of thing. So, so what we do is we just create our own tourism module, tourism and hospitality, and we can come in here and do a sector analysis. Sometimes at the small area, we can't get enough data, so it's not going to show us our breakdown of domestic versus international tourists and things like that. But we can see here, this just talks to us about how many people are employed in tourism in 2019-20, talks to us about our value of tourism, and we can see in terms of employment, punching a bit above Queensland. So a lot of, obviously a lot of casual employment there, a little bit below in terms of our output sales, but value add, so our profitability is a little bit better than the rest of Queensland. And here's our value of tourism and hospitality over time. So we can see certainly what's happened due to COVID. And that would be driven largely by COVID. So you can see you had two really quite good years, and then we've seen this dip away. But you need to remember, this is also year ending June. Okay, so yes, so yes, exactly. Yes, same with where I live in Livingston, exact same thing happened. So you know, it's a different ball game. You know, regional Queensland has, you know, been busy. So it'll certainly be interesting to see that next tourism data come out. I'm not sure about the tourism. It's got year ending June, but I know that we do compile that data sometimes a little bit quicker. I'll look into it and get back to Trudy. And I'll find out whether there is any information that I can get on what's happening in the Southern Downs, because we do that for councils. I mean, at the end of the day, if you guys email us and say, Kat, can you get us some more information on this, that, and the other, we can go and find that information for you. Not everything is in the tool in the product. We got over 1,100 pieces of data. So what we tend to do is work with your teams to be able to say, what are you looking for? What are some of the additional sources we can use? Because say, for example, Scenic Rim are very good at that. So they will contact me and say, Kat, what other data have you got around, you know, visitation to our region? And we ended up finding a lot of information around Google Analytics. So at the moment, there's Google mobility data that you can get for free that talks to you about activity in your parks, you know, those places that you forget that, you know, draw people. So it just helps to see the traffic flow in your community. It helps to see your foot traffic in your community as well. So there's other little ways that we can collect data, particularly because of COVID. We've been given access to much greater data sets. We're not sure how long that's going to last, but you know, things like Google mobility data would be something that often Google would charge for, but it's free. So we're able to break that down into set categories, which has been super handy for us.
checking data from the checking app? Because we
No, that's a
we
great
go back and
idea.
actually look at
I know.
Well, I always say, oh, you know, when somebody goes into, when they go into lockdown, perhaps with traces and people being here, there, and everywhere.
Yes.
So you can find checking where you go.
Well,
We visit a lot of places.
I just said that to Trudy then. I said, mate, if I have COVID, I am like going to be the super spreader from Yapoon. You know what I mean? Because I've gone Rocky, Brisbane, all out west, come back to Rocky. You know what I mean? So, yeah, that's a really good one, actually. I might find out about that because that'd be good for tracking, just tracking expenditure, particularly in hotels and, you know, restaurants and things like that. But that, yeah, that Google Analytics data, I really like it. It shows, and when you actually look at Scenic Rim's data, it shows that pretty much during COVID, where everyone else, I think, fell by, I don't know what it was, like maybe 40%, theirs fell by about 15 because they enacted really good domestic tourism strategies. Like they just hit the market hard in Brisbane and just said, right, we're hitting Brisbane and that's the only place we're going to market to, and we're going to market around open, you know, like outdoor activities and farm stays and everything around the farm and food and stuff like that, because people were starting to go, oh, I want to eat more organically. I don't want to, you know, I need to support local, all of this sort of, you know, these things that COVID sort of made people think about that previously you just did what you had to do. And also trying to get their kids out. So they did a Scenic Rim farm box. I'm not sure whether, I was actually in Brisbane at the time, and you could go online and you could buy these farm boxes and you could pick what you wanted in them. So it was all fresh produce from that region. So eggs, bacon, you know, you could get camel's milk, all sorts of really random stuff. And so you could get this box and it would be delivered to your house in Brisbane. And then when you got the box and you opened the box, it had in it all of this information on local tourism activities, which were all mainly outdoors, like walks, things like that. And well, it just completely took off. It just went crazy, you know what I mean? And at the same time, they were doing other marketing with radio stations and things like that. So they were backing it up. It was a really good, I think, a really well executed strategy for them, because all it did was use their assets, which are food, nature, you know, and that sort of thing. So yeah, I take my hat off to them. I thought it was just really clever using their producers. So they already use their producers for which would be something for here. Like I look here and I go, oh, you may already do it, but they do a regional cookbook every year. And they do that. Each of their farmers provides a recipe, and it allows the farmers to talk about their farm and what they do and how they farm, and, you know, their sustainable practices and all of the stuff, you know, that people from the cities get engaged in now, you know. So I just thought it was really quite clever. So they kind of pieced together everything that they'd already started and went, how can we get and the producers got right behind it. So they were sending potatoes, you know, all sorts of stuff, you know, avocados. And yeah, so I just thought it was really quite clever.
Well, I don't know if it's, I think it's a private business. It's out there. I think shop or farm gate. The truck, yeah, that delivered it to.
Yes.
And I also saw them up.
Yeah. Oh, it's incredible. Like, and they put it out, and the way they did it was really quite clever. Was they did it as a register your interest. So I got, must have been, you know, through my emails or whatever, because I'm on their email list at the council, and I got this thing and it said register your interest for the Scenic Rim farm box. And I was like, oh yeah, great. You know, and what would you like to see in the farm box? And so they had all of this data to basically reinforce what they were going to put in these boxes and how they would work. So you could buy a box for $100, which would come to your door, $150 or $200. So it wasn't necessarily cheap, but these boxes were chock-a-block full of fresh produce from down the road, you know, and yeah, the value of that is incredibly good, you know, and then to back it up with all this tourism information was really quite clever. Yeah, so it got people on the road, but it's something definitely that could be done here for sure, because you've got the producers and you've got the yeah, you've got a, you know, Toowoomba on your doorstep for a start, but you know, Brisbane's not that far away. So it's yeah, certainly you've got the audience.
Never used to do stuff on things like sport,
Mm.
branching out into that.
Well, there is, let me have a look at our industries. And so it's all about,
What's the social impact of it?
yeah, this is all pure economics. We get it a lot, you know, what, and our founder. So this is all based on ANZIC codes. So this is just based on the coding that they do for businesses when you sign up and become a business or whatever it is. So you've got arts and rec services, which includes sports and recreation activities. Okay, so it's giving you that economic side of it, essentially. So it's talking about jobs and GRP and things like that. With regards to your social stuff, we have in the pipeline at ID looking at eventually doing a health ID. So years ago, I think the Victorian and New South Wales governments, there was a program where you had to produce a community health profile, and it talked about how the economic impact and things like this of smoking on your community, of you know, rising cases of even cancer and things like this. So that is something that we're looking to work with the ABS to deliver in communities, so people can start to get an understanding of even things now like mental illness and stuff like that, and how that contributes or detracts from, you know, your economy, and also then bringing in that social side of things. Yeah.
When, I don't know, 5 years ago, USQ and RDA did a joint project of some of that stuff.
Yes.
And Trudy would have that information.
Yes.
Maybe there's a value in.
Maybe. Yeah, I will. I might look at passing that on to my family. Look, it's a massive topic and I love it, because I just think it's the world we now live in a little bit, you know, especially with this health crisis that's come out and the economic impact of what COVID has done for our community, you know. Yeah.
I mean, it was that, you know, the principle really was simplistically, you can go and get a balance sheet and do all of that with, you can go into your financial records and measure your business, right, and how it's going. But how do you measure, you know, the happiness of people? You know, simplistically, how do you do that?
Yeah, absolutely. And they do a lot of, at the moment, and it may be something for your council to consider, we've got a new module called Living in Place, and it's community survey based. So Sunshine Coast, Ipswich, I think Logan and Gold Coast have signed up for it for 3 years. So over 3 years, they're going to measure livability in their community. And it talks about, and you can select your modules. So you can select health, you could select, you know, like finance, you can select like crime, like, you know what I mean? You can select these modules and each module costs you so much, you know what I mean? So I think Ipswich was around like crime, obviously, yeah, like livability around safety and security, that sort of thing, livability around sport and recreation, so recreation in Ipswich, and can you know, and so they can start to get a gauge over that time period. I'll find out a little bit about it and I'll send it on to your economic development team, because I really like what they're doing, and they've partnered with Ipsos. So, and I can show you some of the results from Ipswich, but it just allows the council to start to get, yes, the economics is really important. You need to know, it's almost like your tax, you know, you kind of need to know where you're at. But in terms of thinking about your community, I know Toowoomba's thinking about living in place at the moment, and because their community has changed Toowoomba so much in, you know, over the last 10 to 20 years. I mean, I grew up in Toowoomba, it's like a whole nother world, you know what I mean, now, culturally, all sorts of things. So they're really starting to go, well, what is Toowoomba? You know, who is Toowoomba, and how do we integrate and ensure that everyone's coming along for the journey kind of thing, and living in place helps you to be able to connect with your community to do that. So that's another sort of module we've got that I think is gaining in popularity simply because councils have become more detached from their communities over time. It's just the nature of governance, you know what I mean? Sometimes there's periods where people are really engaged, and then there's other periods where people are really isolated from your governance. And this is, I think, the way for those council areas have said, we need to figure out what's happening in our community. Everything's moving too fast. You know, our population is changing really quickly, and what does that mean for service delivery and that sort of thing? So it's a really nice way of re-engaging and bringing that conversation back in with actual real data. So you're coming out over 3 years with information about your community and your community's needs. And so they then do that survey every 3 years, and it's a phone survey, which is good. So you're just connecting with real people. So here, this is, I'm going to just take you quickly to the economic impact model. Now, the economic impact model, I'm just going to run you through it quick, just so you know what your staff are probably doing when they come in and say the economic impact of that particular project is going to be XYZ on the economy. This is where we can track any of your infrastructure spending. We can track a new business to your region. If there's a new retail business that's coming and they're going to employ 4 people, you're able to get an understanding of what that's going to mean to your local economy. If, for example, when I was at Cairns Regional Council and in 2008 GFC hit and the council decided to waiver infrastructure charges for particular projects. So for every project that came to council, we would have to run an economic impact model to show what would be the economic reasons why council would waiver infrastructure charges for that particular service. So we come in here and we've just been doing one for Toowoomba. And there's 2 phases that we look at. We look at the construction phase. So we come in here and say building construction. This one is for the Cambodia sewage plant. So we've got sales or jobs. Okay, so for this one, we select sales because it's $5.6 million worth of investment they're looking for from the state government maybe. And so we run that through the model. This is just for the building construction phase. And what will happen is we come out with these outputs. And what it tells you, I'm not going to run through it all in detail, but what it will tell me is the total impact on the Southern Downs Regional Council area is actually 6.29 million. So we start with 5.1 million. We then go to our industrial impact, which is our supply chain impacts. Then we've got our consumption impact as people who are working on the project spend their money through the community. Okay, so this is where we come out with those figures. So this is what people talk about when they say we use the ID products to be able to attach to our grant applications to say this is the value of this project to our community. Okay, so that's that total impact on Southern Downs. Then you've got the impact on the Queensland economy is 7.7 million as you spend money outside of the region. Okay, to be able to deliver your project. So money in Toowoomba, money in Brisbane, that sort of thing.
That consumption impact, because say if you did that project, which is a specialised project, which probably means there's nobody within our region who, so you're actually coming in. So will that does that change?
So see over here, you've got local jobs 15, of which 14 would be taken up by residents. So that's based on your journey to work profile. So in the construction sector, what this is telling me is you would have enough people in the construction sector to be able to deliver this project, okay, for the construction phase of it, okay. 15 of those are 15 jobs are created, of which 14 will be taken up by local residents. Okay, so that's the numbers that people would use when they say what is the direct impact and what is the total impact on jobs in the community. So and it's just for the time of the construction of the project. So if it's a 6-month construction, this is what you're creating for that 6 months of construction.
So
okay,
even out of region contractor, they're still going to employ someone.
Yes, and that's also part of your caveats. So as a council, saying that, we want X amount of people employed.
And that consumption, would that also include, like when we have big projects that come here, usually always stay during the week.
Yes, exactly. So your consumption impact is about the people who are working on that project, what they are spending in your community. So, and the flow on from that. Okay, because they're going and buying at the bakery, and then there's flow on as the bakery then spends the money, and it talks about the way that money moves through the economy. The industrial impact is about the goods that needed to be purchased, or the services that need to be purchased to deliver the project. So say, for example, you need to buy pipe and you need to buy, you know, switches and different things along the way, and how that money moves through the economy as well. So then you get your total. Then down the bottom, people attach all of this information to their grant applications. So it goes through all the definitions. It talks about the multipliers, all of the information, and you can just export that into Word or PDF. So we've been working with, while we're out on the road, with different community organisations to teach them how to use the model, so then they can attach it to their reports so they can get more funding for the region. For council, there are different ways that you guys can use it. So say, for example, if you're looking at laying off staff. So when I was at Cookshire, the mayor and I had to sit down and we had to talk about laying off staff, simply because it's not a financially viable council, simply just the size and the stuff that you have to do. So we talked about the different numbers of staff that potentially we could lay off in the outdoor workforce. So we looked at this and we used the model to be able to see what the economic impact of laying off staff would mean for the community. So we were able to, I was able to put some figures behind some rationale of why we should be trying our best to keep that to an absolute minimum, because the flow on of laying off those staff was going to be very high. You can also run it for things like if you can't fill jobs. So some of the training organisations in Toowoomba have been using this model to show that, look, we can't get apprentices, we can't get this, we can't get that. What is the economic impact of not filling those jobs? Okay, you can use it for your infrastructure project. You can use it for some infrastructure teams, like I know the one in Cairns use it for all of their parks and playgrounds that they put in. So they run that through the model and they say, well, not only is it providing a community service, but we're also, this is the economic impact of providing that product into the community as well. So there's lots of different ways. It's not just about grant applications, it's also about looking at council expenditure. It's the same with the event impact calculator. So if you guys support events in your community, so if the show society comes and says, can we have 20 grand to run our local show, or some in-kind assistance to do this, you can actually use this to help justify why you would support that event in your community. So your economic development team would run this model and say, well, the show attracts 5,000 visitors, or the local Warwick rodeo, things like that. This is what it will bring to the community. So when I was at Moreton Bay Council, we had about, I don't know, maybe 50 to 70 events that we as a council ran. It was a big budget for events, so there was about 5 million that went into events. But by the end of it, once we took into consideration all the economic impact of Woodford Folk Festival, Redcliffe Kite Festival, all of these things, we were able to show to the community, well, that 5 million actually has brought in 72 million to the community by time we look at the hundreds of thousands of people that come to our region each year for local events. And we ran everything from the Teddy Bears picnic in the park, which brought very little economic value, but a high community value, right through to the likes of the Woodford Folk Festival or Moreton Bay Triathlon or things like that. So yeah,
Okay.
so you're able to use that to help justify or just an explanation of why you make those decisions to support certain events in your community as well.
Hey, Kat.
Yep.
It's 1:35.
Yeah, thanks, mate.
I just thought I'd point that out.
I'll wrap it up and I'll get over to Trudy.
She'll be on the phone to me otherwise.
Yes, she will. Awesome. Any questions? Really? pretty self-explanatory. You can sort of go through and, you know, yeah, sort of work it out and go as you play. You can't break it at all. So yeah, certainly. Any questions from